Hey guys, welcome back to the Clear Path Podcast on our annual Power Rankings episode. I'm here as always with my co-host Nick Lombardo. Nick, how are you feeling?
Happy to be here, Max. It's the annual tradition. We got to do it every year.
Yeah, we got to do it every year. Nick and I were saying this is maybe the least prepared we've ever been going into a pod, but we're living it. It's
You
still
gotta get
it's
the
still
takes out there. You gotta flesh them out.
yeah,
Remember,
yeah.
like
Flush
last
out the
year, I made the
taste.
standings as we were going. I have the standings this time, but still, I think we're gonna flesh it out, and we'll figure out,
Yeah.
what teams are gonna be good this year.
Yeah, maybe it's more of a conversation, and it's not like we've been extremely accurate in the years
No,
that
no, no, not
we
even.
have done a lot of work. So maybe this will work in our favor, actually.
I think the East too is like a lot of it is it's gonna be the same from last year. Like there's not a ton of big moves outside of like the Knicks. That was a big one, but that's and like I guess Paul George to the Sixers. But outside of that, it's kind of just like rinse and repeat a lot of the same teams and like some depth moves.
Yeah, I feel that for sure. I do think some of that is like a result of the new salary cap rules, so it's just harder to move big pieces. Also, maybe some of it's just like teams like feeling the regret of making really big moves that don't pay off. I'm thinking of like trading for Dame last year and the Bucks not even making the conference finals. So like feels like we're sort of in a transitionary period. And it also doesn't help that this year's draft is like the worst draft of all time. So there's no like impact rookie coming in. Um, so yeah, it definitely does feel sort of similar to last year.
Yeah, I think like you're saying, it's like the salary cap rules, and then it's also that a lot of teams have went all in and now don't have picks to trade. So it's just like a
Yeah.
handful of teams control a lot of teams' drafts too. Can we touch quickly on the salary rules? Like not like
Yeah.
going over them, but just like I just thought it was kind of silly that the NBA would do that. I feel like the most fun part of the NBA was always the player movement. And that's when like the league got really big. Was like everyone was just excited for the offseason and like to see all these new teams and stuff. And like yeah, like continuity is cool, I guess, but I feel like the NBA became more of like a player-driven league and the teams didn't matter as much. And it was just like cool to see all these random players like team up. And now I'm like kind of sad that we're not going to have that as much. And it's almost going to become more like football in a sense where there's just like the big pieces that are stuck there and can't really move. And like Dak is the quarterback of the Cowboys for his entire career because he can't move him. I feel like it's going to be a little bit more like that. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think George getting traded to the Clippers. Did I cut out there?
You did cut out for a second, but I think you're
Okay. Oh yeah, I mean, I still remember when we found out the news of Paul George getting traded to the Clippers. We were in a tent in the middle of the woods
good.
at like 2 a.m. And we were like, "Holy shit!" They just traded everything for Paul George. And yeah, that was super fun. I mean, it does feel like maybe this was like an owner decision. Like they want to gain more of the power. They want the team's branding to be stronger, perhaps, as opposed to like player empowerment. But I agree, as a fan that doesn't, care about it either way. I'd rather see all my favorite players play together, or, like people team up. I think maybe that's like a disconnect between our generation of watchers and like the older generation is like growing up with LeBron going to the Heat and KD going to the Warriors. It's not really a big deal to me if they leave. In fact, I sort of prefer it if every few years I get to see a different version of my favorite players. So yeah, it is sort of sad to not have a really key move this season.
I think the only like holy shit NBA move that was over the offseason was when the Knicks got Cat. I was like, oh
Yeah,
wow. Like, but like outside of I like feel like the last couple of years it's been like there was like 4 or 5 of those where we were just like,
right.
holy shit, like I can't believe this is happening. And I don't know, I think I'd rather have like it's a silly one that people have been talking about for a while, but like Curry and LeBron being able to play
Yeah,
together. Like obviously that's a tough because now they're both like at their franchises and neither wants to move, but like I think I'd rather have like older guys teaming up than just like Steph on this dead Warriors team with like, just like a bunch of mediocre role players around him. I'd rather just have a bunch of stars together and then like you kind of figure it out. I always thought that was like more interesting.
yeah. I mean, I also just think it's the teams are too good now. Like the NBA is like we talked about this even last year. Like they're just in such a need of an expansion. Like the rosters are just so deep. And so it's almost like it's not even worth it for us to try to move 4 or 5 guys for a potential star. Like at a certain point, even to just make the salaries match, like what kind of talent are we giving up, to like make that deal happen. I'm thinking even like the cat trade, like DiVincenzo and Randall, like those are really good players. And it's not like the way it used to be where you just throw sort of the smorgasbord of your like 10 to $15 million players and a couple picks and you can get yourself like a, a, a Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett. So
Yeah. No, I mean, so it'll be interesting in that sense. And like you said, because it is so competitive and we have probably expansion within the next couple of years, that'll be interesting to see like how the league kind of resets like that. Because like you said, the talent is kind of insane. And even like the bottom tier teams, I feel like would be 6 or 7 seeds like 3 or 4 years ago. You know what I mean?
oh yeah. I mean, I saw that Lonnie Walker got cut yesterday, and Lonnie Walker, like 3 years ago, was the best player in the Spurs. Granted, the Spurs team was
Yeah,
terrible,
yeah.
but he was like a 15 to 20 point per game scorer, and a really good defender.
And I
So
think what that was too, I like read something about it that it was something to do with the salary cap was why they ended up cutting him. Like he would
yeah,
have been just so expensive. And that's another thing that's going to be a bummer with this is like, I mean, obviously I'm biased, I'm a Celtics fan, but like this is probably the last year of the Celtics as we see them. Now they're going to have to like blow it up because the team's just going to become too expensive. And like same thing with the Knicks. Like that's probably like maybe a 2 year run before everything gets too expensive, even with Brunson
right.
taking a lot less money. So like yeah, continuity, but it'll be continuity of like the top 2 guys, and you got to just like ship out everyone else because they you can't pay role players $30 million too much anymore. So I
Right,
don't know.
which no
It
one
feels like we're
wants.
on the verge of the league changing a lot.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. I think this the new CBA changes a lot. So yeah,
Want to
but
get
we're
into
good.
it?
Yeah, let's get into it. Um, so maybe just a reminder for our audience of how these things typically go is Nick and I are going to sort of go through. We prepared these lists independently. We're ranking every single team in the East today. We're going to have a separate podcast for the West. Nick and I haven't talked about this at all. I organized mine. Basically my thoughts on how likely they are to win a championship. And I typically like to think of it of regular season success and playoff. So a combination of both, both matter to me. And yeah, we're gonna take turns sort of going through each of our teams and then having a conversation about where each of us rank it and why. Um, and so I think just because there's more to talk about on the top half. Let's start with the very beginning on our very number one rated team. I'm sure we have the same one because, like we said, it's not much has changed. But I have the Boston Celtics, and I have them in a tier of their own. So they are my only tier one team. I think they might even be for me like overall the top team in the NBA. They sort of lost nobody and they didn't gain anybody, but when you're coming off a championship run, losing nobody in itself is a win. And yeah, just another year together, another year with Missoula as a head coach. Feels like this team shouldn't lose more than 20 games this year.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. I mean, yeah, I would probably have them as the number one overall team and like the favorites to repeat just because of how good they are and having that, second year of continuity. I think it really just comes down to injury luck this year. Like obviously they had a tough time with Porzingis, but I feel like that's going to be a yearly thing of like, yeah, I'll play like 60% of the games and you just hope he's
Yeah.
available for like the right amount of time with it. But barring like a big injury to one of the two big guys, which to be fair, they really haven't had any injury like issues their whole career outside of Jalen missing one playoff. So we're almost in a way kind of due for it. But outside of that, I don't see any reason why they shouldn't be the number one seed, why they shouldn't be heavy favorites to go back to the NBA finals, really.
Yeah. I mean, even with what you're talking about with injury luck, like that team is so good and so deep that they can rotate a lot of guys. I feel like they don't need to put, especially like guys like Drew Holiday or Derek White or Jalen Brown. Like they don't need to play those guys 60 plus games if they don't want to. They're gonna have a lot of easy matchups. They're gonna blow a lot of teams out by like 20 points. They'll be able to rest Tatum in a bunch of fourth quarters. So even in that aspect, I feel like they'll be able to manage their load pretty well. And yeah, I don't know. Like this team is too good. Like even they're bringing in like what Shireman is the rookie they drafted. That's sort of like the only guy they picked up that might have some sort of impact on the team. And even he is like a ready to go rookie. Like feels like they're pretty inevitable.
Yeah, I feel like with the top five guys, you probably need like three to be a really good team still. You know, if you have like one of the Jays, one of the guards, and then Porzingis, that's still
Yeah.
a really, really good team. And I think they do have like as much motivation as you almost can as a champion because there's no it's no secret that their path to the championship broke like about as good as it could have. Not having to play the Knicks, not having to play the Sixers, not having to play the Nuggets, who gave them a lot of trouble. They like having to go through the Pacers and the Cavs, who were like, had some injuries on both ends. Plus like the Olympic stuff with Tatum and Jalen, and like Tatum not winning the Finals MVP or the Eastern Conference Finals MVP. I think for a team that won a championship, they still have a lot to prove. Um, so yeah, I think all around, like everything's looking up for the Celtics, and they really probably should be the heavy favorites to come out of the East, if not win the championship again this year.
It is interesting to think about, and we can move past them because we've talked about them for a bit, but it is interesting to think about that they won the championship, and I don't think that anyone really changed their mind on any player on the team. It's not like people are calling Tate like Giannis won the chip, and then everyone immediately was like, Giannis is the best player in the world. Jokic won the championship, and everyone was like, this is like a top 10 offensive player of all time. But Tatum and them won the championship. And if anything, like Tatum's stock over the summer went down with all the Team USA stuff. So it does sort of feel like they have a chip on their shoulder still somehow. I mean, I personally still don't know if I would put Tatum in my top five, like of players in the NBA. Like even though like it feels like the team is just so good. So personally, I feel like they still have a lot to prove. So
I agree. I still think Tatum has another level to get to. It almost still seems like confidence wise, he gets kind of shaky with like the
yeah,
weird 3-point shooting in the Olympics. And like, as much as I would bang the table and be like, you have to play Tatum during the Olympics, like he wasn't one of the best five players on the team at that point. So like, how
yeah,
could you? So I still think they have another level to go. I think, people definitely respected Jalen more so after everything and like realized how good he is. But no, it's very cool. Like this was one of the first teams in a while that won a championship as a collective without
right,
having like the best player in the final series, which was always like our parameter for like which team is going to win is like, well, who has the best player, and
right.
that was like all the LeBron, you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, I mean, they definitely didn't. I would still say Luka was the best player in that series, but this team was just too deep. So,
Yeah, yeah,
um, all right, let's move on to. I mean, I have a tier two. What do you are you on your second tier as well?
yeah. You go
All
for it.
right, so maybe you want to throw me your second team in the East?
My second team in the East is the New York Knicks, and I don't think it's especially close.
Yeah, I also have the Knicks here. I have the Knicks here. This tier for me is four teams, four teams, so tier two. But I agree that the Knicks are at the top of this tier. You want to go through it?
Yeah, give me your four teams.
Yeah. So my four teams are the Knicks, the Bucks. Then I have the Magic, which may be a bit shocking, and the 76ers because they have the reigning MVP. So sort of
I
have to
had
give.
those four teams as well in a slightly different order. I had Knicks, Magic,
Okay.
Bucks, and Sixers.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. That's funny that we both have the Magic up here. Maybe we should maybe let's start with the Magic then, because that sort
Yeah.
of feels like the elephant in the room, even though we have the Knicks ranked higher. I mean, what I have written down is that they're like sort of by default, they need to be like if they're ever going to be good, now is the time, right? Like if Paolo's ever going to be a top 10 player, if Franz is ever going to hit another level, if this team is ever going to be a real contender in the East, it sort of feels like now is the chance. Um, I think they've missed on the draft the last few years for sure, right? Like they drafted Jet Howard over our guy, the Yukon shooter. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but like one pick before, he's been basically nothing. Anthony Black last year was number 6 pick. He's sort of been nothing. They've sort of like lost out on a lot of young talent coming in, and they haven't added a lot free agency wise. I have them down as just KCP, which is an important piece, but how good is your team really if you're really relying on KCP? But it feels like to me this has to be a Paolo and Franz are now in the conversation. They have to be perennial all stars. We got to be talking about Paolo Bencaro the way we talk about. I don't know. He like right now it feels like he's in the Julius Randle tier. He's got to get to maybe even the Tatum level, like this like
Mhm.
top 10. Um and I feel like he can be. I believe in his ability to do so, but we just haven't seen it yet. But I'd bet on it, like given the teams around them.
Yeah, me too. The reason I put them a little bit higher than the Bucks and the Sixers is because I feel like they have more depth and they're younger. They also have a really nice defensive identity. They gave the Celtics and a lot of the top teams a lot of trouble last year. And yeah, I mean, like looked at a lot of these young guys and you project them all to go up. I think KCP is a nice piece. I think he got a little overrated. Like
Yeah.
he's not anything crazy, but he's like, oh, like a prototypical 3 and D that like you'd be happy to have on any team, so it makes sense. But
And the veteran
um,
leadership is what I think with
right,
such a
right.
good team. Yeah.
It was a very young team last year, and they got their first like taste of like a tough play up matchup. And the Cavs were a little bit more experienced, so they took it down for them. But if like there's any team that's going to go and be kind of a surprise in the East and make a lot of noise in the regular season and then push for a deep playoff run, like it is the Magic. Like they're on the right path for like what a young team should be that wants to go and like be a playoff contender. Whether they're like still one kind of score piece away, and whether that's like just Franz taking a big step up or Paulo taking a big step up. I think that remains to be seen, but I think everything is looking up for them. I think they have done a pretty good job of building out this team. I think the one, kind of criticism you could have team building wise is that draft, and then also that they weren't able to use that cap space while all the guys were young. Like just being able to get KCP is kind of a bummer, but I think
Yeah.
everything's looking up for them, and I wouldn't be surprised if they made some noise in the playoffs this year.
Yeah, and I also feel like shooting wise is where they really struggle. I mean, Franz is not a great shooter. Honestly, neither is Paolo really. Neither of them are like sharpshooters. Jet Howard was supposed to be that guy. He sort of is unplayable on defense and it also sort of a little bit unplayable on offense too. Like, watching him play reminds me of Steve Novak. And they have a lot of non-shooting guards, like Jalen Suggs and Anthony Black both aren't. I mean, Suggs improved a lot last year and brings a lot on defense, but it sort of feels like it's like Cole Anthony or bust with this team a lot of times on the shooting side. So yeah, if Franz can knock down a three more consistently, if they can get more run out of a guy like Jet Howard, I'd be really into this team more. But that's sort of where I think you're right. They need someone to step up. That's not going to be Paolo because you can't keep carrying the brunt of the offensive load.
Yeah. But in terms of the way they design their team, I mean, having like a stretch big, I mean, it reminds me of the Celtics, right? You have the two wings who are pretty good. You have Suggs as like the Marcus Smart, like defensive guard. And then you have Carter as like the stretch big. You plug in some shooters around him. And like it's the makings of a really good team that I think has the potential to really step up and be a tough team in the East this year.
Yeah, totally. But maybe we should talk about our actually second ranked team in the East before we keep going with the Magic. I mean, the New York Knicks, as a man who lives in New York now, I cannot tell you how great the vibes are. I will say the cat trade sort of felt like when you break up with a girl because like you guys just aren't this is the end, like this is as far as it could possibly go between the two of us. That's how it felt with losing Randall, and then picking up Kat was like, yeah, there's a foreign exchange student, she just joined school, it might be fun. there's a lot on paper here that would work out between the two of us. Let's just see. Let's
She's got
just
some
see.
baggage, but like, whatever. Be
Yeah, we could
fine.
figure it out. She's in a new location, she doesn't speak the language, so we could teach her. I don't know, maybe moves in the, is the metaphor of it, but that's what it feels like. It's like, um, yeah, like Randall's definitely brought them to this point. Like I remember when they signed Randall, and he wasn't even this guy yet, and he sort of took that next step there, and was definitely beloved. But I always felt like in big moments, you couldn't trust Randall. He couldn't create his own shot. He can't play defense really in the playoffs, and he wasn't a spot up shooter. So like it was really hard to see him in playoff basketball, especially with the emergence of Brunson as your actual number one guy. And I actually think a big part about the Cat trade that no one's really talking about is you're getting Cat at like a good point in his career. If this was Cat 3 years, he'll be trying to be that guy. But this is Cat after a year of playing with Anthony Edwards as the best player on his team. And we saw him totally accept that role. Like this was like Cat's lowest usage rate. He averaged like he had games where like 10 points or just like three shots, and he's like totally into it. And improved drastically. Like if this is the version of Cat they're getting, totally a big difference and makes way more sense with that team. You can play him and Robinson together. You run the pick and pop with Brunson and Randall, or Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns. Yeah, the shooting allows you to play guys like Josh Hart still. Like I love the way that this roster is constructed. The biggest fear, obviously, is just when you make such a two big moves, right? Bridges and Randall, and losing Randall for Karl Anthony Towns. How does that work chemistry wise, and how can the coaching, in their first year? But on paper, this team's great.
Yeah. I mean, I think I echo a lot of the points you're saying about the Randall trade. Like, I think with Randall on this team and him thinking he's the best player, the team had a ceiling in a
Yeah,
sense. You know what I mean? Like Randall was never going to bring you to like that next tier of playoff teams. And I also think it would have been tough for him to come back and then there's all these other guys, and then he'd be what, like maybe the fourth or fifth option, which is not really what he's used to. It doesn't really
yeah,
like fit with the rest of their kind of like team identity in a sense. So I think you had to move Randall, and I think being able to get Karl Anthony Towns, like you said, at this point of his career for like not that insane of a price is a
right.
pretty damn good move. I think doing those trades obviously hurts their bench a little bit, and it gets kind of thin outside of those big five guys. But I mean, in terms of a team to challenge the Celtics, I don't know how you could craft a more perfect team with those three like really good defensive wings. A tough point guard who's, probably like a top 10 isolation player at the end of the games. And then, if Cat can kind of settle into that role and chill out with some of the fouling and some of the dumb stuff, I think it could be a really good team. But it will be interesting to see how Cat goes down in New York. I feel like he got a little bit of a pass for a long time with all the dumb shit because he was in Minnesota and they were just like happy to have a star. And I think like Cat could go one of two ways with like the New York fans. I'm not sure they're gonna love all the dumb shit he does.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's part of the Tibbs aspect of this trade, right? Like, I mean, you're talking about they're not very deep. I think Tibbs isn't playing more than seven guys in the playoffs,
That's
and
true.
honestly, the
That's
regular
true.
season, anyways. So
Yeah.
like, it doesn't really matter as long as they're all healthy. But yeah, I mean, New York fans will be the first to turn on Cat. Not everyone's in love with the trade, for sure. Like, he doesn't really fit in personality wise, but if they win, no one's gonna give a shit. So, you know, um, and yeah, I think the Bridges trade allowed them to make the Cat trade, right? Like just being so solid on the wings with Hart and Bridges and OG Anunoby, like that was the biggest problem in the playoffs is you could isolate Brunson and sort of get him in a bad switch. But if you got these three wings that can always switch and guard anybody, like it's sort of real. And if Cat's actually playing defense, like it's really, really hard to sort of go at them offensively. They sort of have like the three of the best defenders in the league, like bar none.
Yeah, so they're gonna have a crazy defensive identity. They have those three wings. Yeah, it's gonna be a really tough team to stop. I think the only bummer about the Cat trade was trading DiVincenzo. Like I think that would have been a really
Yeah.
cool storyline to have all those guys together and like the power friendship or whatever that stuff is. Like that would
Right.
have been really cool to see, but I think for like you, they'd kind of be silly not to make the move at that point to be able to get one of the best, shooting big man and a guy who like fits with their team really well, especially after Mitchell Robinson got hurt and you were looking around, you're like, I guess just start the four wings at Brunson and just be super small or like, I don't
Oh
know.
yeah. Yeah, or Jericho Sims, like that. So I think you're right. All right,
But yeah,
let's
wouldn't be
move on.
surprised if they came out of the East at all this year, if
No,
something
I
happens to
wouldn't.
the Celtics.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like you said, they match up really well. Like they have guys throughout the Jays. I mean, Cat should be enough to at least hold up against Porzingis and Horford. So,
And you
and
probably trust Brunson more at the end of games than Tatum/Brown.
yeah, I don't know. And then good home court, like it's a real deal.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, let's talk about the next team in this tier for both of us since we have the same teams. I have the Bucks as my third team, second team in this tier. I think it's pretty straightforward. Giannis is just too good for me to put lower than this. Like, don't really love the team. um, don't I think they're like really due for regression. We're getting a Dame a year older. We're getting Chris Middleton a year older. Giannis, since he's won the championship, hasn't really grown as a player. He still can't really shoot. The team's not really well constructed around him, in my opinion. I mean, even a guy like Brooke Lopez is a year older, but Giannis is still a top five player in this league easily. So you can't put him low out of this tier to me. But this is why I feel like the Magic have a real chance to take it because I just feel like a lot of these rosters aren't so well constructed.
Yeah, I think I still wouldn't be surprised if the Bucks made a run to get out of the East this year. Because this kind of has to be almost like the last year of this construction of team because of the ages of everyone. I mean, even some of their bench guys are getting up there in years. Um, and Giannis, seems extremely motivated just from like some of the quotes and stuff that are coming out. Everyone's kind of pushed him to the side for the Celtics and Luka and Jokic and Wemby and like I feel like we kind of forgot about Giannis from how high of esteem we held him a couple of years ago. Um, I think the other case for them to be good this year is like was last year just the year out of hell. They Dame came in without like a training camp because he thought he was going to be traded. Middleton was coming back from the surgery, and then they had the whole thing with the coaching hire and Doc coming in mid-year. And maybe it was just kind of the worst case scenario and the worst that we'll ever see the Bucks. I mean, this team has had a lot of continuity, and I think Dame still has some left in the tank to be able to do it. So I wouldn't be surprised if they still competed for the East, but I do think the Celtics and the Knicks are a clear tier above where they are now.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the key to it is their young players, right? Like, if we're expecting some sort of regression, can a guy like Andre Jackson Jr. play real minutes for them? Can a guy like Marjan Beauchamp can he develop into a shooter? Even the young guy they draft this year, like AJ Johnson, who's like the rawest of the rawest prospects, like can they get anything from these guys in a meaningful way that will impact winning? I don't know. All three of those guys kind of are non-shooters, which really scares me because Giannis is also a non-shooter. But yeah, I think that's sort of if they're gonna be a real contender in that Knicks and Celtics conversation for me, I think that has to happen.
It's pretty brutal, man. Like the talent drain on this team has just been brutal. And now with like trading some of those picks away for Dame, it's like, what do they do if they don't win this? Like if it's another first round exit, what do they
Yeah.
do with this team? Like really the only move is to trade Giannis and just restart or like to tell
Well, that's what
Giannis to
Giannis
basically
said, didn't he?
take a year off. Like there's nothing else you can do with this team. It's
Yeah.
pretty disappointing outlook going forward. I mean, even if they do win it this year, what do they do next year and the year after? Like it is tough, tough, tough.
I mean, that's what Giannis said, right? He said if we don't win this year, have to leave, but said it in a way that was like they'll have to trade me, which was
Yeah.
very funny. But
Well, they were
I
concerned. That's
agree.
why they did the Dame trade, right? Because they thought maybe there was a chance he was going to leave. But yeah, I don't know. There's not much left for Giannis if like they don't get it to it this year, at least make a really deep run at it. So it even felt like
Yeah.
the Doc hiring was a little bit of like a panic move. You know what I mean? I don't know. Like I don't get Doc Rivers, like
Yeah, no, I
whatever. You know?
agree. I mean, yeah, Doc Rivers in 2025. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, not where I want to be as
That
a fan.
'08 championship run really just like
Just
boosted up his.
it
It's
is
like two.
crazy.
It was 2 decades ago at this point. You know.
Yeah, he hasn't been a good coach in God knows how long, but yeah, still getting paid though. So
So him paid.
all right. The last team in this year for both of us is the 76ers. I know neither of us are really high on the Sixers, but it's again sort of the same thing I felt with the Bucks, where it's like they're just too like Embiid is too good for me to put lower than this. But I think the key to this is health. Like Embiid said he's never probably never playing back to backs ever again in his career, which is like a crazy thing to say in the modern NBA. That means he's missing at least 20 to 30 games a year at a minimum, which is like, okay, like how are we gonna win like 40% of our games without our best player? Paul George is already hurt. That that injury was already did not look good, and he sort of avoided a major injury, but who knows when he's going to be back to 100%. So what are we with? We're left with Tyrese Maxey, and who, like they drafted Jared McCain this year. That's a lot to ask out of a rookie. Like Kyle Lowry has been pretty awful since he signed with them. I don't know, like Caleb Martin turning back the clock. It's like, what is going on this team? I mean, if you don't have Embiid and Paul George for 30% of the season, then this team is legitimately one of the worst teams in the East, like in those games, right? But because of the respect I have for Embiid as a dominant force in the league that I put him this high, but I'm also really worried about them.
Yeah, I mean, Maxi is awesome. And like that was an incredible draft pick to be able to get that. Because if they didn't draft Maxi, this whole era of 76ers basketball could have been even more disappointing, after
Yeah.
like how much promise they had when it was Simmons and Embiid and all those draft picks and everything. But yeah, I mean, it basically sounds like they're going to put Embiid on the Porzingis plan, which like no back-to-backs, play 60% of the season. And like that
Yeah.
works for the Celtics because they have four other good players, but I don't know how that's going to work for the Sixers and then be, like even avoid the play-in really
Yeah.
if you're doing all that. Um, do you want to shout out the Yabusele edition and
Yeah.
finally fulfilling his potential? He looked pretty good in the Olympics. I was like, someone should sign this guy, and they did sign him, so I was kind of bummed out
Yeah.
about that because he was a Celtics legend. But yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty down on this team, and I think I will be down on this team as long as Embiid's the best player. I just don't really believe he's durable enough to get through a whole playoffs as talented as he is. And um, Paul George in Philadelphia, I feel like it's just like basketball wise, it's a good fit, but like personality, like vibes wise, it's just awful with like
Yeah.
when was the last
Really
time you
weird.
really had like a good playoff series and just like how disappointing he's been. It's almost a good match in the sense that like Philadelphia and Paul George have always been disappointing in the playoffs. So maybe if you put them together, it'll like cancel each other out or something.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, looking at this depth chart and looking at this roster, like I just really don't see a top tier team in the East. And this is another team that it's like you have another disappointing playoff berth, and where do you kind of go from here? What is Embiid's value on the open market? Like, what is the next kind of pivot point for this? Do you just try and build it around Maxi, or you just, hope and pray that Embiid's finally going to stay healthy for a whole playoff run?
Yeah, I mean they're like damned if they do, damned if they don't, right? Like you don't want to be the team to trade one of the top five players in the NBA. Like you never want to be that team. But on the same side, like this guy can't play. Paul George is what 34, like coming off multiple major leg surgeries. Like that's definitely not where I want to be. So it's hard, but yeah, like at least for this year, I they should be in this conversation. But I mean, last year they finished as a 7 seed. Like I could easily see them doing that again, in the plan again. So
Yeah, I still think Maxi wins them a lot of games, and whatever they do get out of the healthy games with George and Embiid, and theoretically, if all those guys are healthy, plus you have Caleb Martin, and like you have some decent role players on this team like Oubre and Lowry and Eric Gordon and Yabu, and like it still has the makings of a decent team in the East, but I think the days of us really talking about them as a true contender to win the East are over. Like I have four teams, and I probably could even put some of these next teams that we're going to talk about over them, given Embiid's health concerns. So
Yeah, that's fair. And that's a good segue into our next tier. So this is my tier three. Do you want to introduce your tier three? Sort
I
of
didn't
throw.
put them in tiers. I just ranked them. So you give me your tiers, and I'll
All
I'll
right.
give you it that way.
All right. This is my tier three. So this is sort of where it gets a bit, the order starts not mattering as much to me, but I have the Cavaliers, I have the I have the Heat, and then I have the Raptors in this same tier. So I can't quit the Raptors. I just will perpetually love Masai Ujiri and the way he constructs a team. It really resonates with me. But yeah, that's sort of my tier three. This is sort of the end of the tier where I could not feasibly, but if any team within these first three tiers made the finals, I wouldn't be shocked, or I could see them doing it. Any other team below this, I cannot see in a million worlds make the finals. Like the every team in front of these teams would have to like die in a plane crash. Hopefully that wouldn't happen. But in order for that to happen, like this is a last group of teams that I could see even in a million years make the
You
finals.
like a 1% chance, you're saying,
Right.
for some of these
Right.
teams, right? Yeah. Yeah, I don't. I'm not as on board with that. Like, I just don't think the Cavs are good enough. I don't think the Heat are good enough. I don't think the Raptors are good enough. But my tier was pretty close to that. I had Pacers, then the Cavs, then the Heat, and then I had the Bulls, and then I had the Raptors
Wow.
at 10. So I had the Bulls one above it.
So you have the Bulls up here. That's hilarious.
I
I
did, I did. I think because we don't have to
okay.
get into the Bulls right now, but they were like a 7 or 8 seed, basically 500, and they lost to Rosen, but are going to get back hopefully like Lonzo, Levine, and Giddy as additions to it. So it's still a pretty solid team overall, and I feel like the Bulls will just perpetually be 500, But
So I mean maybe we should get into it. Well, we can get into it maybe later, but I actually have the Bulls as my worst team in the East.
oh, whoa. Let's
So,
start. Let's start with the Pacers Cavs
all right. Yeah, let's start with Pacers. Or yeah,
because I had
we can do
Pacers
Pacers.
above. I had Pacers above the Cavs.
Yeah, I mean they can be. You can talk me into it. I just think the
Mhm.
Cavs maybe on paper have a little bit more talent, but the Pacers are sort of like their construction better. I mean, I think the key to me with the Pacers is we sort of saw two different Tyrese Halliburtons last season. In the beginning of the season, he was like on fire. He couldn't miss. He made that offense run. And then in the second half, he got hurt and then sort of just like never recovered from that. I think a lot of that actually had to do with the new rules about like playing games to qualify for awards, which I think in
Mhm.
general is a good thing. Like, I do think that durability should matter, but it is really tough when we're like aligning financial incentives, especially for a guy like Halliburton that, hasn't gotten all the money yet. I mean, we're talking obviously, we're talking about in the tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of $1 million here, but he was a guy that, hadn't made all NBA, hadn't done any of that yet. So it was really important for him to do all that. So it sort of seemed like he was playing through an injury all of last year. So hoping that he comes and then he played Olympics and was pretty awful in the Olympics too. But assuming he recovers 100% and we're getting the Halliburton that we got in the beginning of the year last year, he is he is an offense in himself. Like sort of in the opposite way, like a guy like Luca or a guy like LeBron even is like an offense in himself. Like he moves the ball so much. He makes everyone around him so much better. Like I sneakily had I was listening at the who I felt like were the key players of every team, and I have Aaron Neesmith as like the third most important player on this team, which like in general would shock you or like concern you, but watching them play last year, like Neesmith was really, really good. And like I think a lot of that was Halliburton like pushing the ball in transition and getting open shots for him. And if he can do that, he really is such a floor raiser for all these guys like Nemhard, Matherin, um, them better in a way that not many people in the NBA do. So I can totally see why you would have them higher. You could talk me into them in that next year if he could even take a step up, if he could carry more of the scoring burden.
Yeah, I think the Pacers actually have a chance to like I wouldn't be surprised if they jumped up pretty high in the regular season standings and like somehow
Yeah.
grabbed a 2 seed or something because their
Yeah.
team is very much built for that, just like the run and gun, run everyone into the ground. Halliburton running the show with like all these really solid NBA players around them and like young guys who still have like little jumps to make in their game, like and also kind of the additions in a way of like a full season of Siakam having Matherin for everything. Plus all like the little contributions from Nemhard and McConnell and Turner and Neesmith, and like it's just a well constructed team. I think making that playoff run was really important for them. And they did like it was a sweep, but it was a competitive sweep against the Celtics, taking out that Knicks team. Like that answered a lot of questions for me for where this Pacers team could be. In terms of being in like the top tier contenders in the East, I think that's really tough. I mean, I think things broke really well for them to be able to get to that Eastern Conference Finals run. But I mean, things are really looking up, and if they can, somehow add another piece or some of these young guys really take a step forward, I think they're in position to be able to be really competitive at the top of the East for the next 3 or 4 years, especially with all these guys on, their rookie contracts and everything. So yeah, I'm really high on the Pacers, and I almost wanted to put them higher, but it kind of the pedigree of like the Bucks and the 76ers and the Knicks, took me back from doing all that. But yeah, I think this is a really good team and a really competitive team and a fun team to watch as well.
Yeah. I think they can be. I just think my biggest gripe with them is if Halliburton's not this guy, they have nothing else. And we
Mm-hmm.
kind of saw what happened. Like Siakam actually played really well last year. I kind of felt like he took a step.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, it's hard. But
I
if
didn't think Siakam would fit this well with the team either, because like you think of Siakam as almost like a little bit slower, more methodical player, but he
yeah,
fit in better with this team than I thought he would.
yeah, and he created a shot better than I'd ever seen him with the Raptors, which was really shocking. But yeah, if Halliburton can take another step and like create a shot, like be like a 25 a game scorer, like and really create his own shot in a real way, I think you're right. I think they can totally be in that other tier for sure.
I think
Um,
it's like you were saying, it's like the lack of the top tier talent that kind of puts a
yeah,
ceiling on them because they don't have a guy like an Embiid or a Giannis who can just go in at the end of games and do stuff like that. But I still think like it I think they have a chance to do something like that, even though last year everything did feel kind of like gravy. Like no one expected them to make that deep
yeah,
of a run. No one
right.
expected them to win like the in-season tournament. And so, they were able to play with such light expectations that it'll be interesting to see how they come back this year when there actually are expectations for them to be a good team and be in the top half of the East.
Yeah, 100%. And then sort of like the flip side of them is the Cavaliers in a lot of ways because I feel like they did have a lot of expectations going into the season last year. Um, I think they're extremely talented. Like I think the Garland Mitchell backcourt is really talented on paper. Mobley is like a unicorn in a lot of ways. Like he sort of fits in that like Chet, not Wemby because Wemby's in a tier of his own, but like that sort of player, like that stretch five that is really lanky and can impact the floor on both ends. Um, but honestly, this sort of feels like a make or break to me in a lot of ways. For almost every single player on this team. I mean, Donovan Mitchell's been in trade rumors basically since he got there. Darius Garland was getting a lot of fraud accusations last year. Mobley definitely has not taken the step that we've needed him to take in order for them to be like a real contender. So it does sort of feel like, yes, like if they start off hot, we're all the way back, right? They have everything to make me feel like they're back. But let's say they start off really slow. I could see this team blowing it up. I think Bickerstaff is one of the hotter seats of the coach in the entire league. They start off like 5-10. I think he's gone. Like he might not even make it that far. So I could see it both ways. Like if they start off 10-5 or 10-2 or whatever, I could see them making a move, adding somebody like Zach Levine or something like that. I'm just making things up now. But like they could sort of go either way for me. And I'm sort of interested. They're one of the more intriguing teams. Because yeah, if a guy like Mobley takes a step, but it sort of feels like we've seen the ceiling of Garland and Mitchell together. Like it just sort of seems like it doesn't work.
It's such a confusing team because you look at it on paper, and like you said, it's the antithesis of Indiana, where it's like they have that top tier talent, and for some reason, just like the pieces don't really fit together. Like the Garland and Mitchell backcourt, like on paper, you'd think it'd be so great, but it almost seems like Garland's been kind of pushed in the back when at some point it felt like Garland was going to be like the Halliburton, right? Of just like
Yeah.
controlling everything,
Yeah.
moving the ball around and all this stuff. And Mobley, I feel like for a couple of years, and granted he's still very young, we were just like waiting for him to take that next step and really be like KG 2.0 and be all over the floor and everything. And you saw it a little bit in the playoffs, especially with Allen out, where they were like unlocking a little bit more things with him. Um, but yeah, I think overall, like we've kind of seen the ceiling of it, and I really could see this team going either way. Like, maybe something clicks for them, and then all of a sudden they're like a top three seed in the East, or it just becomes a very unhappy team, and all of a sudden they're trading Garland, just because they need to switch it up and do something else different with it. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
seriously, like all the talent in the world, and I think a lot of room for some of these young guys to still improve. But a team that's kind of been stuck in the mud a little bit, not really being able to get into that next tier of contenders.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like if I was to bet my life on it, I just don't. I think the Garland Mitchell thing is done. Like I don't see it. They're both undersized guards. Neither of them really guard really well. The NBA sort of has become like a really defensive forward league because every team is so deep. Like there's so many guys that can attack you. And having two guards that are like 6'2", 6'3", like just sort of doesn't cut it anymore. Like we sort of saw this in Portland. It sort of reminds me of Dame and CJ, albeit not even as good as those two guys. So yeah, I don't know. I think you have to have them here because they're just so talented. But I think basketball wise, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, one thing that could kind of help explain a little bit why they are kind of stuck in the mud is even though they have great guards and they have great, big men, like they've still never really been able to find that swing guy who connects
Yeah,
everything. And that's where they've really been lacking, where they're just like doing bargain bin shopping with like Niang and Levert and Struess and Okoro, and none of those guys are really like everything they need to be that, kind of connected piece in the middle. So the most likely scenario is probably like it's in the middle, right? They're a 5 or a 6 seed,
yeah,
they have like a semi-competitive second round exit, and you're just kind of left like just feeling a little unsatisfied with their season. But I mean, it's
yeah,
Cleveland, it's whatever. Like I'm sure they're just happy to be have like a competitive team and like fun guys to watch and some stars and stuff. So like they're fine.
yeah, totally. Okay, next team on this list is perennially the underdog sleeper is the Miami Heat. Um, finally sort of died off last year in terms of playoff success. We sort of saw like that Cinderella run come to an end. Um, they sort of feel like the Pacers to me in the sense of like I don't really think they're so talented. I have my concerns about an older Jimmy Butler that can't really spread the floor. Duncan Robinson's like one day he's good, one day he's awful. So it's really like they have a lot of guys that you're like Terry Rozier. You're like, yeah, maybe if he's like my eighth guy, and then you're like, well, he's starting and gonna play like 30 minutes a game. And you're like, well, I don't love that. Um, but like Hero is really good. I think Bam's gonna take a step. It seemed like the Team USA stuff really helped him. I really like Jaime Jaquez. I think he can be really, really good. So, like, yeah, if they get like a real offensive step up from Jaquez or even Hero or Bam, I could see them becoming more serious. But besides that, I'm sort of like what are we gonna get from this? Like I'm sort of confused by the roster.
Yeah, and the Jimmy thing has been interesting too. Like now they, I know Pat Riley kind of called him out after the season. He's coming back and saying now he's going to play more games and kind of take things a little bit seriously. And people did give him a lot of equity for those finals runs, as they should, as being really one of the top tier players in the league. Um, so yeah, I think this is definitely a put up or shut up kind of season for them.
Yeah.
Being able to add Rozier, and they've done a pretty good job with, some of the additions in the draft, specifically Jaquez. I know there's a lot of promise from Jovic as well. So they have pieces to be a pretty competitive team in the East, and it's going to be kind of a question of whether they can overachieve again in a sense and like really make a run at it. And even last year, everyone got hurt, so it was kind of tough. But I still will stand by they are a tough out in the playoffs with the style of basketball they play and how intensely they play defense. Um, and with that Rozier and Hero kind of backcourt, it seems like they'll have enough offense now to really kind of to push it. And Bam is one of the most versatile players in the league. So yeah, I think it's a put up or shut up season for them. I still think they can somehow vault themselves into one of the top tier East contenders because they're going to be a tough out in the playoffs regardless. But yeah, it feels like if it doesn't go well this year, then this might be it for the core.
Yeah, I mean, Spoelstra is the best coach in the league, right? Like he
Mm-hmm.
sort of has a coaching advantage against anybody he goes up against, so I trust that. But yeah, it's just hard with the way the roster is constructed, and there's just not a lot of upside pieces. Like there's just not a lot of guys I think can take a huge step. So that's what we're
But
worried
still, if
about.
you look back at we'll look back at the Jimmy Butler era, the Heat, and be like, that was still like they were a tough, tough team to play for 5 years and really overachieve with the talent that they had there.
Right, right. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so then the last team I have here that you don't have is the Toronto Raptors. Um, just a real big believer in Scotty Barnes, man. I just I can't
Is
quit
this the
Scotty
year?
Barnes.
Is this the year?
I mean, you know what? Like maybe this is the year, you know? Like I mean, besides that, I actually think they have a lot of really underrated pieces. Like a guy like Pirtle, I really love. I think he's super underrated. I think he does a lot of stuff that like Şengün does for the Rockets. I think the way that Hartenstein was being used in the playoffs by the Knicks, like I mean, I think he's better than Hartenstein. I like he sort of is like a big man playmaker. They have like kind of have a roster of guys that all can handle and move the ball, which I really love when like, it's like the way that the Nuggets were are built. I'm not the hugest fan of RJ Barrett, but he's good. He's good enough. He's not going to be an all-star, but he'll give you 20 a game and he'll play good defense. Manuel quickly got the extension this offseason, probably for too much money, but he is still one of the best ISO scorers in the league. And I sort of sneaky liked their draft and sort of like some of the roster construction they've been doing. I think they've sort of been lacking on defense ever since they lost OG, but they drafted Jacoby Walter, who's a good defender, and Davion Mitchell they signed the offseason, which I sneaky think is a good pickup. Like he's a guy that can really guard and might be a guy you could throw out there with Manuel Quickly or RJ Barrett, and then you could really get like a lineup of defenders out there, which I love. So yeah, I kind of like them as like a dark horse 7-8, 6-7-8, like hard out in the second round, the way you were describing the Heat. And I think they're well coached and they're a well run organization. So I'm expecting good things from the Raptors.
Yeah, I had them a little bit, like I had them one spot lower than you. I think you had them 9 and I had them 10.
Yeah.
And part of that was I know Masai made some comments in the offseason, basically just being like, it's a rebuilding year. So I wonder if they are going to kind of treat it like that in a sense and just kind of treat this team as like a way station for assets and try and, rebuild it back up to the top, like Masai said. But yeah, I think there's definitely some intriguing pieces on this team. Boucher and Grady Dick and Mitchell and Quickly and Barrett. But there's not as much of the higher end talent unless Scotty Barnes does finally make that leap and becomes the really connected piece that you can run everything through.
Yeah.
I think Barrett will always be kind of a little disappointing. And I don't
Yeah.
think Knicks fans are like really upset about that trade and like losing Barrett um in that sense. So yeah, I mean, I think they could be kind of a surprising team. I think they are a little bit of a mess of a team right now with how it's been constructed, but that's kind of as planned, and they, still have a lot of room to grow and kind of move forward with it. So
Yeah, for sure. Um, okay, maybe we should talk about the Bulls, which are your 10th team and my
okay.
15th team. Well, I've determined as the worst team in the East.
Okay.
So how about you give me your rundown on why you have them here?
Yeah, I still think they have a ton of talent. I mean, Lonzo, like, who knows what you're going to get from him, but the playmaking of Kobe White, Sumo, Giddy, and Levine is still pretty formidable. Vucevic has been, a very productive player for this whole time. And then you still have Patrick Williams, who still has some levels to go up. Like, obviously, he's not going to be Kawhi 2.0 like people thought he was going to be a couple of years ago. But I think the Bulls still have too much talent to be that much lower in the East, especially when you look at like the Wizards depth chart and the Nets depth chart and the Hawks, and you see like how depleted those teams are of like, NBA rosters. I don't know. There's been some giddy buzz about like, like, get the ball in his hands a little bit more. Like, let's see what happens. And yeah, I just think, there's not much upside on the Bulls. Like, I couldn't ever really see them being higher than a 6 or a 7. But I think there's also too much talent for them to really bottom out this year and be the worst team in the NBA.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I hear what you're saying, but I'm not sure I buy it. Um, I think, I mean, for me, the biggest issue is I don't think anybody on this team, bar their new draft pick, Matis Buzelis, wants to be in Chicago. I think they might all hate each other. It seems like everyone there doesn't really want to play basketball. I have serious concerns about Lonzo Ball. Like, I think it's a testament to his determination and his willpower to fight back, but I have real questions about him being a contributing NBA basketball player in 2024, 2025. Um, Zach Levine feels like he's ready to retire to me. Like, it seems like he doesn't even want to play basketball, or at least not for the Chicago Bulls. He seems like the first guy to get traded. Like when LeBron is like, bring me a guy, it's gonna Zach Levine's number one on the list. I think if you offered a second to the Bulls right now for Zach Levine, they might take that just to get off his contract. I think losing DeRozan is actually a pretty big deal. I think DeRozan, like his clutch shooting and clutch playmaking, sort of hit a lot of the flaws of this team. Um, Vucevic is a year older. I'm not sure I really believe in him anyways, as like a focal point of an offense and especially not of a defense. Pat Williams is a nice piece, but definitely is not a contributing factor on the offensive side of the board. And yeah, I don't know. Like, yeah, I guess Giddy, I guess Kobe White. Like, I mean, Kobe White to me feels like every other guy we've ever seen in a career year that has not gotten paid and then all of a sudden is really, really good in their one career year. Like this feels like the Hornets guy,
Contract year
Devontae
boost.
Graham.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. This
I
feels
think White's
like
better than that, but okay.
yeah, if this feels like Rozier, this feels like, like we've seen this guy before. Like, yeah, he was really good last year. He needed to get paid, so he had to be good. What's gonna happen now that he's got the money? I don't know. So that's sort of where I'm coming from with this. I think the NBA is so good that if you're not all together as a team and they don't know what they want to do, I think it's done.
I hear what you're saying. I do feel like this has seemed like an unhappy team for a couple of years now. Um, but I mean, with the guys they added and like, theoretically, like the guys they're, getting back, like, I mean, they really didn't have Levine for large portions of the season last year. So, I think it comes down to how much you value DeRozan in that late game scoring and the leadership and everything that he brought. But they were basically a 500 team this year. I think they maybe take a little bit of a step back from that, and they're more in like the 35 to 36 win club. But I still think there's too much high end talent on this team, barring like a huge blow it up trade where they ship out Levine and Vucevic in the same package or something like that for them to really bottom out. Even though that might make the most sense to just bottom out and kind of restart with some of these younger guys and kind of restart the whole roster building process with them. But still, I think there's too much talent for them to be a bottom tier team for me. I think they're more like sniffing around the play and probably fall out the last couple of weeks of the season.
I mean, that's fair. Like they are much more talented than like the Wizards are. And this Buzelis kid is getting a lot of buzz, but I don't know. The vibes are off, and
Vibes
I'm
are
gonna
off.
okay. So I'm into my tier four now. So I have two more tiers. I have a tier four and tier five. This is just three teams for me. So this is the Hawks, the Nets, and the Hornets. Um, they're all pretty interchangeable to me. I don't really care where you put anybody on this tier. How about you? What do you have?
Do you want to give both of your last two tiers? Because I feel like they're all these
Yeah,
like last 15 teams are kind of like you could change them out depending on which young guys you like and stuff like that. So give me
yeah. So I've
your last couple, yeah.
yeah, I have the Hawks, the Nets, the Hornets, and then I have the Wizards, the Pistons, and then the Bulls as our last team, which we just talked about.
Got it. Which team you want to talk about first?
Uh, I mean, I feel like we should talk about the Hawks, right? They had the number one pick in the draft.
Yeah, I'll give you my bottom five of the East was Raptors, Hawks, Hornets, Pistons, Nets, and Wizards. I guess six.
Raptors, Hawks, Hornets, Pistons, Nets, and Wizards. Okay, fair. So it's pretty similar to what happened last year. I mean, we're not that far off. It's just this Bulls thing that is sort of inconsequential. Um,
So the Hawks,
the Hawks. I mean,
sad. The sad DeJounte Murray era is over.
that's sort of the main thing, right? They traded DeJounte, um, and they got the number one pick in the draft. That should matter, at some point. Zachary Rissachet from France. This was an unprecedented worst draft of maybe all time. Uh, from basically anyone that you ever heard talk about the draft ever, they were like, we're drafting for like eighth men on the roster here, which is sort of crazy. Looked kind of awful in the preseason. Doesn't see he's supposedly a shooter, athletic 3-and-D type. Doesn't seem like he can shoot much. Always hard to project defense on a rookie. Um, so it doesn't seem like he's gonna have a huge impact on the team this year. This seems like more of a project sort of situation. Besides that, I mean, they still have Trae Young. He's by far the best player out of every player in this group of teams. Um, and they still got some guys. They have DeAndre Hunter still. I mean, do you want Onyeka Okongwu or Clint Capella? They're sort of the same to me. They're both fine. Um, I mean, they in the DeJounte Murray trade, they got Dyson Daniels back, who's kind of fun. And then the better Bogdanovich, the younger Bogdanovich. And then yeah, like your fair share of 6'10" forwards, Jalen Johnson, um, Larry Nance is in here. I'm looking at just the roster now, so I don't know. I don't have much to say. Seem fine.
Yeah, with the Hawks, there's not as much to talk about because after like a big trade like the Murray trade, like the team almost is just kind of like a corpse, and like there's still like some pieces that are sitting around for it, but I just don't really see much of the upside with this team unless you're in love with like a Hunter or Jalen Johnson or we'll see how Risa Shea goes, but it's one of those teams I'm really not excited to watch. Like I'll check it out to see if Risa Shea is doing anything, but like you were saying, it feels like he's one of those guys who might not contribute at all for like the first year or two. Might be like a Bruno Caboclo, 2 years away from being
Hey,
away kind of thing.
hey, Bruno had a moment this summer. You finally,
uh, I do like Daniels though. I felt like he kind of got buried on the Pelicans, that whole thing and all that. But yeah, it really feels like a Trae Young trade waiting to happen because,
yeah,
outside of
for
it, there's just
sure.
not a ton of upside here unless, Risa Shea or Jalen Johnson are going to take a huge step up. So yeah, disappointing. I feel like the Hawks were kind of on the verge of being an interesting team and just could never really capture it quite enough to get over it. But Trae
Yeah.
Young's going to score a lot, so that'll be cool.
Yeah,
No
no.
one to compete with for shots now. I mean, geez.
I mean, it does sort of feel like we've seen the best of Trae Young somehow. I think the main problem is like you want to trade him, but who wants him?
Yeah.
Like it's what is like the Lakers? Like it just doesn't like there's not a lot of teams in the league that need a small guard that is gonna take like 25 shots a game. So sort of hard
I
to figure out what to do there.
I still think it'd be kind of interesting to see him on the Spurs with Wemby because Wemby could just
Oh,
cover
yeah,
so
true.
much defensively. But then again, like, would you want someone who has the ball that much? Like, but still, like, think of like the pick and rolls and like the lobs and stuff that he could find with him. And sure, like, Trae Young's a very ball dominant guy, so I don't know if that would really fit with what the Spurs want. But like, that'd be
Yeah.
kind of interesting to just have like this super tiny guy popping threes and then this giant who's just covering for him defensively and rolling to the rim for all these easy dunks.
Yeah,
With how
that
good
is
Trae Young is
yeah.
in the pick and roll. So that's my one of my basketball hopes for team up. But I mean, seriously, like if you take Trae Young off this team might win like 12 games. Like it's
No, yeah, this team
bad.
is god awful. I mean, they might still only win like 20 games, like even
Yeah.
with Trae Young. So,
Yeah. So out of
um,
respect for them, we have them like out of respect for Trae Young, we have them like 10, 11.
yeah, I think I have 11. All right, who do you want to talk about next?
Hornets. I almost put the Hornets a little bit higher. I almost put the
Yeah,
Hornets at
yeah,
9. And then I kind of went through it and looked at it and looked at it. And then I put them back down to 12.
yeah. I kind of like the Hornets.
I kind of
I
do too.
agree.
I feel like they could like jump up and be a playing team. Like they were decent for a couple of years and then kind of took a step back with like the LaMelo injuries and Bridges doing what he did and all that stuff. But
Yeah,
Miller showed a lot of promise this year. They
yeah,
still have some pretty good centers, and then I think the additions of Josh Green and Grant Williams just have some like veterans. Well, not really veterans, but like young player veterans who kind of know what they're doing. Like I wouldn't be
right.
surprised if this team is a little bit better than we kind of give them credit for, and if they're a little bit of a surprise in the East.
Yeah, I think LaMelo needed some time away, maybe. Like, I think it's probably really hard to be the only big star in Charlotte. Um, so I do sort of like them coming off all of that. Like the Josh Green edition. I mean, they got some pieces. Trey Mann, I like a lot. I mean, obviously Brandon Miller. So we'll have to see. I mean, I do think like being in Charlotte plays a big role in all of these players' developments, but hopefully if LaMelo takes it seriously this year, this could be a sneaky playing team.
There is some kind of path for like if LaMelo becomes the Halliburton, like orchestrating it, and
Right.
they don't have quite the like um the kind of talent that like the Pacers have with all those young and gun kind of guys. But there is a path for them to be like a sneaky playing team and like a fun team to watch if LaMelo can really like rein it in because he's one of those guys like almost like Ja where we just like everyone just kind of forgot about him for 2 years because he was just like off to the side being injured and not really being on a productive team.
Right, exactly. So yeah, excited to see what he can bring to the table this year.
I'll be interested to watch the Hornets for sure. I'll tune into some games.
Yeah. And another team that I am actually interested in watching is the Brooklyn Nets. Um, I think they also sneaky have like a decent amount of talent on this team. I mean Cam Johnson. I'm done with Ben Simmons, obviously. He's just a name at this point, but um Cam Thomas, obviously Nick Claxton. They have the other Bogdanovich, which is crazy. Um, Dorian Finney-Smith. So they have like a lot of sneaky talent. Dennis Schroeder, I'm seeing on the roster. Um, and yeah, like there's not top end talent, but sneaky, like a lot of continuity on this team. Um, like typically with bad teams, they sort of switch it up a lot. But Cam Thomas, I actually think is pretty good and is a starter in this league. I feel the same way about Nick Claxton. I think he's a starter in this league. So, like sure, maybe they're gonna make some moves, but they're sort of plucky. Like they're like a team that can really get hot.
Yeah, I think it's NBA guys on the team for sure.
Right.
I think the Cam Thomas, number one option will be pretty interesting. I mean, he's a guy who could like I think he was 27 points a game, after they after like in the second half of the season. So it'll be interesting to kind of see him just like go out there and shoot it. And there's still a team that is positioned since they are in New York to go and get a star.
Yeah.
So if it is like a Trey Young or that type of player, like I don't know, maybe like an Embiid or something,
Right.
like they could go star hunting and still have kind of that infrastructure of like good, solid role players around them.
Yeah.
Not a team I'm going to be especially interested in watching. Not a team that I think has a ton of upside potential. I actually had them as the second worst team
Wow.
in the
Okay. Yeah.
East,
Fair.
but yeah, because there's just not too much to get excited about. I think that's kind of part of it, but who knows? Maybe Ben Simmons comes back, and this could be like the Ben
Uh,
Simmons. Oh, it's like all set up for him. He can do everything he wants to on it. Um, yeah.
yeah, I mean, we might be done with that, but yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe.
How many years have been for Simmons now? Like 3 years since he was a real player.
I think four. I mean, once his contract is done, does he
21?
even make a roster? I'm not sure he makes a roster after
I
this year.
don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, he hasn't played in a couple of years now at this point.
Yeah, which is crazy to say. I mean, living the dream. He's making like 30 plus mil a year doing nothing, hanging out.
Gets to live in Brooklyn and make 30 million a year. It's
Yeah,
fine.
he goes to fashion shows in France. Like, worst lives to live, but maybe just not for an NBA, not for a team.
Yeah, jeez. I mean, seriously, like, what was he? Maybe like a top 15
I
trade
mean,
asset
he
three,
was
4 years ago.
there was a year where I thought he should have won defensive player of the year or at least like had defensive player of the year buzz. He was like a near all NBA first. I think he made the all NBA third team one year. Like he was a real guy before all of that. I really think it's the Philly aspect. Like if he wasn't in Philly then it would have been different. But something about that like mental aspect I think really killed him.
I'll be interested in the Ben Simmons documentary in 10 years. Like, how
Yeah.
much of it really was the back? How much of it was just like mentally he didn't want to do it? And how much of it was like he liked being the celebrity more so and was just like, I'll just take my 30 million and then, like you said, just go do all the interior celebrity stuff and wasn't really that into basketball the whole time, you know? Because like a
Yeah.
guy who's that good to not be able to shoot a lick is like points a little bit to like how hard was this guy really working, right?
Yeah. I mean, our favorite podcaster, Kevin O'Connor's theory on him actually being right-handed the whole time is in itself like like if people are questioning if you're shooting with the right hand, you're probably not caring enough about how well you shoot. Um, so yeah, I agree with that. I mean, but he was definitely my favorite player for like a year there, if not
Yeah.
longer.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, that's
just
cool,
love the
man.
way he
It's
pushed it.
yeah.
Yeah.
His defense and just moving the ball around. And he really did have like it was like top five vision in the NBA in terms of some of
Oh
the
yeah.
passes he was getting off and the way he could run things. So,
Yeah, and then putting him at
I'm
point guard, like
not sure I'm rooting for him, but like it would be interesting if he came back. I hope this isn't the end of the Ben Simmons story because it's an
I mean,
interesting story.
yeah, if we're talking about guys that like windows that closed, that like if they were just good on the Sixers and then Fultz was also good, like and we didn't even talk about him when we talked about the Magic, but like if they just put it all together, that team would have been crazy.
Yeah. Or they just take Tatum, which probably would have
Or if they,
made more sense at that time. They just
yeah,
take Tatum and Simmons, Tatum, and Embiid. Like, I don't know.
that's pretty
I don't know.
unstoppable. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, next
Who we got
team,
left? Pistons and Wizards.
Pistons or Wizards? Which one do you want to end with?
Let's talk about the Pistons. I'm slightly more interested in them.
Yeah, I agree. Um, yeah, I mean they're sort of plucky. They're like a worse version of the Hawks, which is probably not what you want to hear if you're the GM of the Pistons. But Cade is sort of like Trey Young. They have some nice, interesting pieces. It seemed like um Monty Williams was actually really holding back a lot of these players. Like the Jaden Ivey thing is just so weird. They just refuse to play him. And now everyone in training camp is like he's like the best player on our team. So that's really odd. So maybe he'll have a resurgence. I mean, got some fun guys, Malik Beasley, Jalen Duren, Isaiah Stewart, like
Thompson.
yeah, the Thompson, the freak athlete, Osar Thompson. Um, Yeah, it like they sort of do have some pieces. It's just like none of these guys are good basketball players, maybe question mark. Like you're really like questioning like their basketball IQ, which is never really where you want to be, or like I don't know, like yeah, like Asar can't shoot. Cade is hurt all the time. You know, like they have a lot of like freak athletes, a lot of long shot. I mean, Tobias Harris is on this team actually, which I didn't even notice
They
until
gave him
right
30
now.
million. They gave him 30 million.
I mean, they got to give some
Which is like not that much, yeah, in NBA
right.
dollars nowadays. But no, I'm with you. I think there actually is a little bit of upside here. Like they could make a play-in run if things break right. I think the
Yeah,
Killian Hayes, Jaden Ivey thing was really strange.
yeah,
I assume that was something that came down from like ownership or something where they were like, let's make sure this guy sucks before we like release him. But to do that at the expense of Ivy, who I thought has some real potential, is kind of strange.
yeah,
But if you squint a little bit and you look and you're like, okay, Cade, Jaden Ivey, Thompson takes a step up, Tobias Harris, and Duran, like that's not a bad rotation. So I think
yeah,
they do have like play-in upside, and like you said, getting away from the Monty Williams thing, which was just strange, like that they had to pay him that much money because he obviously didn't want to take this job. And
yeah.
then having some of those, pieces like Hardaway and having Isaiah Stewart, who people like. Um, if you look at it like that, then yeah, there's like an NBA team here this year that could be semi-competitive for a play-in spot in the East. And I still do think, even though the shooting and everything hasn't really broken right for Cade the first couple of years, I still think he has the potential to be like a top 20, top 30 guy at some point during his career and be one of kind of like the NBA stars. So, we just kind of forget about him because he's in Detroit and he's been hurt. But I still think there's a lot of talent on this team. I think we maybe overrate some of the guys just because they were like top five picks, so they kind of carry that pedigree with them for a little bit longer than they should. But still, like a team I'll be interested to watch, and a team I think could end up, even though I had them 13, I wouldn't be surprised if they end up in a playing spot.
See, they are the reason why I have the Bulls last because I look at this team and I go, they have everything the Bulls have, if not more, right? Like, if not just better, straight up on paper. And I don't feel like they hate each other. And I feel like they're on
I
the
don't
up.
know. I don't know. Monty Williams is not didn't seem like a happy team last year.
Yeah, but now that he's
No,
gone. So they have a common
no, he's
enemy to
gone.
bond against. Yeah.
I just think the Bulls, and we don't have to rehash it all, but I think the Bulls have more known quantities than the Pistons. So that's why I felt comfortable with putting them a little bit higher. The
That,
Pistons, like when was the last time the Pistons were even in the playoffs? Where they were just
yeah,
like
I have no
getting
idea.
bulldozed by the LeBron teams in like
Yeah, they must have made it one of, no,
16.
I don't even think they made it one of those Drummond years. It must have been, what was, the year they had Brandon
Like
Jennings? Didn't they have
The
Brandon?
Stanley Johnson, Reggie Jackson era
Yeah.
Pistons. I
Oh,
think
that's
that
when
might have been
that.
the
Yeah,
last
you're right.
run.
Yeah, it must have been the Reggie year. Not they never had Brandon Jennings. I'm making that up. You're
No,
right.
they did, but that was a long time ago. A long
Yeah.
time ago, they had Brandon Jennings.
Yeah. All right. All right. So then the last team. I mean, this is my worst team in, or second to worst team in the East. This team is god awful.
Yeah, yeah, I had
Um,
him last.
the Washington Wizards. I mean, yeah, maybe I should have had them last. Like Alex Sarr, the second pick in the draft, somehow already seems like a bust, which is
Yeah,
insane. Like
yeah.
he played like 10 minutes of basketball and everyone's like, wow, he's awful. I mean, that clip of him pulling up from three in transition reminded me of 2K. Like it was like in 2K when you had to like hunt a badge and you're like, all right, guys, just get some threes up so I can get my dead eye. So I'm just not gonna take this open layup. Like it's crazy how poorly run this franchise is. I mean, Jordan Poole is their best player. He's sort of been awful for the last 3 years. Kuzma, uh, Kuzma said you can't
Fair.
uh, write the story of basketball without mentioning his name. So that sort of puts it in perspective about where he thinks he is in the pantheon of basketball greats. Yeah, so not much to be excited about. They have a guy named Ray J Dennis. So
It's a very unserious team outside of Valanciunas, but
yeah,
I mean, I think they're still There's not much. I mean,
Koulibaly.
I've always liked Sadiq Bey as like a 3 and D guy. I'm not sure, but then again, like I feel like 2 or 3 franchises have kind of given up on him and just traded him away for nothing at this point. So
Yeah.
maybe I should stop liking Sadiq Bey as much. Koulibaly's kind of interesting, like just so raw that you can kind of almost fool yourself with the potential of like what could he be.
Right.
But again, outside of Valanciunas, just seems like a very low IQ basketball team, a very unserious team with like SAR and everything. Maybe, he'll make us eat our words, but I'm kind of with you. It doesn't seem super good to
Doesn't
me.
seem
So
good. Yeah.
I think probably before the end of the year, Valanciunas is gone, Brogdon is gone, maybe Bay is gone, maybe Kispert is gone. And again, it's just kind of a waste station for assets where they're doing what they should be doing, which is like, taking some bad contracts and being the third player in trades to get more picks and stuff. Um, but really feels like they're still 4 or 5 years away from like actually having a interesting basketball team that has, some semblance of actually being a team. Um,
Yeah.
so
I mean,
so
there's sort of no one on this roster that you would want to be on your basketball team if you wanted to win. Like maybe
Valanciunas, we're don't
All
Valanciunas is a good player.
Valanciunas.
He's
Yeah,
like
Valanciunas, I
if we took
guess.
this roster right now and put it on the Celtics, who plays? Valanciunas
I don't even
is
think
like the
Valanciunas
eighth
plays.
man, and maybe Bay or Kuzma get some
Maybe
minutes.
Poole as an eighth man, just off the bench, give you like 10, hit some shots.
I think
Like,
Poole's kind of a lost case, honestly. He was
yeah,
pretty bad
Poole's a
last year
he's,
in like a
he's
situation where he
not.
shouldn't have been that bad. I think the Warriors really like elevated him to a level that he shouldn't have been at. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
because no one was worried about Poole, so it's just like he could do
yeah.
whatever he wanted at that point. And if he scored 0 points, it didn't matter as much. So we
I
kind
mean,
of noticed
even
more of
like
like the blow up games.
The Johnny Davis pick is crazy. Like he's
Yeah,
just
it's
done.
wild.
Like from 2 years ago, he's just done. That's a 10th pick in the draft. That's just he's not gonna be an NBA player. We can say that for certain. Like it's just crazy. Like there's nobody. Like, it's crazy. Yeah.
That's what I'm
So
saying. Like I look through everything and I just feel like you can't say this isn't the worst roster in the
no, you're
East, at
right.
least.
I
Like the Bulls
overreacted.
have to be above. You wanted the Bulls to be the worst team. You want them to be the worst team, but
No,
this
you're
is
right. I
like
want them to be the worst
objectively
team.
just an awful team.
Yeah, yeah. This is object. This is bad. I mean, Cooper Flag next year. Maybe they're taking at the right time. Cooper in Washington D.C. Depending who's in office, that might that might play well. Uh, so maybe they're making big moves. Actually, we're just
Yeah.
not seeing the 4D chess here.
Yeah. Like when the Jazz got all those white dudes for a couple of years in a row.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
like,
Like
huh, interesting.
they go grab Laurie Markkinen. I'm sure they can get Laurie Markkinen. And it's a different team. All right.
Closing thoughts
So,
on the East. Anything else you want to talk about here?
I mean, it just seems pretty straightforward, like you said off top. Like the only teams I see making big moves potentially are the Magic, maybe the Raptors. um, but yeah, otherwise, it sort of feels like we know we can sim through the season and we sort of know how it's going to end up.
Yeah, I agree. I think really like the Pacers maybe could jump up into the top bunch. The Magic could kind of get there, but really, once you get down, to that like 7, 8, 9, that kind of range, there's not a ton of teams that have the potential to really jump up and make a lot of noise. And it really seems like it's the Celtics to lose, and the Knicks are obviously going to be a tough out, and the Bucks and 76ers still have some pedigree, but outside of that, it seems like kind of a wash from last year.
Yeah, totally. All right. So that's the end of the East power rankings. We'll be back next time with our West power rankings. Thanks for listening.